Hey everyone, ready to dive deep. Today we're all about the heart of Linux, the engine room, you could say, managing software.
Absolutely. And trust me, this is way more exciting than it might sound. We're talking about having complete control over the software on your system.
Okay, so when I think software on Linux, I think apt. Is that kind of like the App Store for Linux, would you say?
That's a really good way to think about it. apt, which stands for Advanced Package Tool, is essentially your command line gateway to a massive library of software, all organized and ready to be installed on your system.
Sign me up. So how do we unlock this software haven? What's the magic command?
The magic words are apt-get. It's the tool that makes everything happen. You can think of it like your personal software assistant.
I like the sound of that.
Ah.
So let's say I want to install something specific, like Snort. It's a powerful intrusion detection system. How would I use apt-get to make that happen?
First, you'd want to make sure that Snort is actually available in your system's repositories, those online software libraries we talked about. You'd use the command apt-cache search Snort to do that.
So it's like browsing through a catalog, making sure they have what you're looking for.
Exactly. And the great thing is you'll get a description of each package just to be sure you're installing the right thing. Once you've confirmed it's there, you simply use apt-get install Snort. It's that easy.
Wow, that does sound easy. But what about those other bits of software that Snort needs to work properly? All the dependencies.
Ah, yes, dependencies. Think of it like building a house. You need more than just the bricks and mortar, you need the wiring, plumbing, all those other essential components.
So software is the same. It relies on other software to work. Does apt-get take care of all that too?
It does. That's the beauty of it. When you use apt-get to install a package, it automatically takes care of downloading and installing all those necessary dependencies. It's a real time saver.
That's amazing. But what happens when I'm done with Snort? Or maybe I just need to free up some space on my system. Can apt-get handle the cleanup as well?
It can, definitely. apt-get is really good at keeping your system clean. If you just want to remove Snort itself, you'd use apt-get remove Snort.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if I want to get rid of everything associated with Snort, like configuration files, settings, the whole shebang?
That's where apt-get purge comes in. Use apt-get purge Snort, and it'll wipe out all those extra files too, like a digital clean slate.
So we've covered installing software and removing it. What about keeping things up to date? I imagine that's pretty important in the Linux world.
It's essential. Updates come with new features, bug fixes, security patches, all sorts of improvements. And luckily, apt-get makes it really straightforward.
Okay, walk me through it. How do we keep our system fresh?
It's a two-step process. First, you update the package list. That's like checking for the latest versions of all the software available.
Right, so you're making sure you have the most up-to-date information.
Exactly. You use apt-get update to do that. Once you've got the latest lists, then you use apt-get upgrade. That's the command that actually downloads and installs the updates for all the software on your system.
So apt-get update is like checking for updates, and apt-get upgrade is like actually installing them.
That's a good way to think about it. And a quick word of advice, even though upgrading is generally very safe, it's always a good idea to back up your important data beforehand, just in case.
Sound advice. So we've been talking a lot about apt and repositories, which is great for software that's readily available. But what about those times when you need something a little more cutting edge, something that might not be in the official repositories?
Ah, that's where things get really interesting. That's where we enter the realm of GitHub.
GitHub, it's like the Wild West of software, right?
In a way, yeah. It's a massive online platform where developers from all over the world share their code, collaborate on projects. It's a real treasure trove of software.
So let's say I'm looking for something specific. I've heard of Blue Diving, a Bluetooth hacking suite, and I can't seem to find it in my repositories. Would I find it on GitHub?
You very well might. GitHub is home to all sorts of open source projects, from small utilities to massive software suites. And each project has its own repository, which is basically like a project folder containing all the code and files for that software.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'd find the Blue Diving repository on GitHub. Then what? How do I get that code from GitHub onto my Linux system?
That's where Git Clone comes in. Git is a really powerful version control system that developers use to track changes in their code, but it also lets you download a copy of a repository directly to your system.
So instead of installing a prepackaged piece of software, like we do with apt-get, we're downloading the source code and essentially building the software ourselves.
Exactly. It's a bit more hands-on, but it gives you access to the very latest versions of software, sometimes even before it's officially released.
That's really cool. But I imagine it also requires a bit more technical knowledge, right?
You're right, it does. But the beauty of Linux is that it offers something for everyone. If you're not comfortable with the command line, there are some amazing graphical user interface tools, or GUIs, that can make the whole process much more user-friendly.
GUIs. Now, those are my kind of tools. So much easier to use than the command line, especially for something like managing software.
I agree, GUIs can definitely be a breath of fresh air for a lot of users, and when it comes to package management on Linux, there are some really great ones to choose from.
Like what? What are some of the popular options our listeners might want to check out?
Well, two that come to mind right away are Synaptic and GDebi. They're both really popular, and they're basically visual front ends for apt. So under the hood, they're still using the same package management system.
Ah, so you get all the power of apt, but with a much more user-friendly interface.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Instead of typing out commands, you're browsing through categories, clicking on buttons, looking at software descriptions, much more like what you're probably used to.
So it's kind of like using an app store, but for Linux.
Exactly. You can search for specific applications, see what they do, install them, remove them all with just a few clicks.
That's awesome. So it seems like Linux really does give you the best of both worlds, right? You've got the power and flexibility of the command line, but if you prefer something more visual, there are great GUI tools available too.
Absolutely. And that brings us to something really important about Linux. It's not just an operating system, it's a philosophy. It's about open source.
Yeah, open source. I've always found that concept fascinating.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. The idea that the source code of the software is freely available for anyone to see, study, modify, even redistribute, it's a whole different way of thinking about software development.
So it's not just about getting software for free. It's about having the freedom
Yeah.
to understand how it works, to adapt it to your own needs, even contribute to its development if you want to.
That's what's so great about it. It's about collaboration, transparency, and I think that's a big part of why the Linux ecosystem is so innovative. You've got developers from all over the world contributing their time and skills, creating amazing software.
It's a real testament to the power of community, isn't it? It really is.
So we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've talked about apt, GitHub, GUIs. What are some of the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember about managing software on Linux?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that Linux gives you choices. You can manage your software in a way that makes sense for you. If you like the command line, great. If you prefer a GUI, there are plenty of options.
And no matter what your level of technical expertise is, you can find the tools and resources you need to get the most out of your Linux system.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to explore, to experiment. That's how you really learn, and that's part of what makes Linux so much fun.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the world of Linux software management. Hopefully you've learned a few things, and more importantly, that you're feeling inspired to explore and experiment on your own. Absolutely, and remember, the Linux community is vast and welcoming. There's always someone out there who's willing to help if you get stuck. So don't hesitate to reach out, ask questions, and keep on learning.
Until next time.